What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Shockwave48 here. Welcome back to a brand new video. And of course, we still on and on. As I said, well, all the time. More information about My Hero Academia, what's going on with Deku, and what's going on with the second user. So pretty much we're at the point where there's something strange happening to Deku as he first arrived when he, punched Shigaraki in the face and whatnot, and pretty much the battle's gonna get even crazy. But right now, we're gonna see the hidden danger behind Deku. Now, yes, he's manifested some more quirks, and yes, he's powerful and all. But there's only one quirk that he has to manifest that he's not ready to use. But it might happen, but we just don't know what power he'll wield. So right now we're pretty much trying to figure out the information right here as I watch this video. And of course, before I get started, make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and make sure you have a notification if you didn't remind. Here you go. So yeah, alright, so let's go ahead and see if we can get some information out of this video.
Is the second one-for-all user's quirk? I keep scratching my head and I keep thinking about this problem, really wondering what it would be, because I have a strong opinion about what I think it is that I'll share with you guys in a moment, but then there's so much surrounding that I feel like we have to take everything we know about the second user into account, so I want to just kind of compile all that information into one video before we end up seeing what the second user's quirk is, to more or less set it in stone, finally, what I think it is, where I think it's going to go, so we can set the prediction and just see where things are going to pop off to. But I suppose none of that is possible without discussing what we know about the life of the second user of One For All. But heads up here, folks, I think at some point this is going to take a dark turn, because I think this story has unfortunate consequences, really dire ones in fact, for Deku. But we're gonna get there. First, let's go through what we know about the second user of One For All. So first off, we don't know his name right now or the name of his close ally, even though we do know what his close ally's quirk is, the third user. His quirk ended up being Fajin, which Deku did recently use and is using right now in My Hero Academia to fight Shigaraki. But what we know about the second user is that he is the leader, actually, of the third user and a big group of people that he formed to strike back against All For One. Because the second user was born in the same era or around the same time that All For One was doing all of these awful things at the beginning of his dark reign. And that's of course because the second user had to be around back far enough in the timeline to meet the first user, a scene that we do see in My Hero Academia's manga, which is something I actually really want to focus on because it gives us our first big hint about what's going on in this guy's life and how it likely ended. You see, we know the second user of One For All, before he got One For All, initially came and raided All For One's base and found the first user in his basement, or locked away wherever All For One had him locked away. When he opened the door, he was ready to blast away whatever was behind the door, and instead saw a sickly young man who was the first user, and instead decided to reach his hand out. But the most important thing that I want you to take notice of here is that in this scene, the second user doesn't have the scar on his face that he does have when he's in the Vestige world, anytime that we see him interacting with Deku or the other quirk users. Now we're going to cut away to something very, very recent actually in My Hero Academia, which was when Shigaraki initially had the flashbacks to the second user when Bakugo was fighting him. Now, in that scene, we have All For One within Shigaraki pretty much freaking out about Bakugo and the second user, and people are wondering what connection is there between those two characters. But this line of dialogue comes directly after Shigaraki, or I guess All For One, saying, "Why am I struggling against this person? They're not even a user of One For All." And I think, of course, it is partially just the similarity in how both of them look, and there probably is a family tie there. But another big part of it is I believe the second user actually fought All For One before getting One For All. That's right. I think the second user survived a battle against All For One without having One For All, meaning the second user, whether by working together with all his allies or just by the amazing power of his quirk, was able to hold off All For One and survive and not be brutally maimed or destroyed afterwards, because we don't see a scar on his face when he goes to save the first user, and more importantly, in the flashback that All For One / Shigaraki has of the second user, he doesn't have a scar on his face there either. Meaning that this flashback of All For One seeing the second user right in front of him with no scar on his face is probably from a battle that they had from around the same time that the second user went to go save the first user. And you could imagine that All For One probably was there. I mean, we know that All For One did have access to his brother. He could walk into his room anytime that he wanted to and talk to him or bother him. So it's probably likely that All For One was there there guarding the room or was there in the area and did decide to abandon his brother, sadly, and have him taken away by the heroes. Or I guess not the heroes, really just the vigilantes, because that's more so what they were at the time. But does that mean that the second user fought All For One off successfully with all of his allies? I mean, it does seem like it. We'll talk about what his ability to fight All For One on those terms likely means about what his quirk does, but continuing on in the life of the second user of One For All, we know that at some point in his life, he does get this big massive scar on his face that we see when he's in the Vestige world. And we do sort of see the transfer between different One For All members as a flashback in Deku's head, or I guess as kind of just a graphic for us to see in the manga at a certain point. I don't know if that's been animated yet, but at some point the second user did have to give the quirk on to the third user, and I do believe, like every other user of the quirk so far, he did eventually have to fight All For One again, because we know that All For One was hunting down the One For All users and trying to take them down. But he was never able to steal the quirk because either his hatred wasn't enough or the quirk was given to the next person already by the time that he fought the person. Now, my theory here is that the scar on the second One For All user's face is actually from when he died. I think that large scar on his face is just representing the wound that All For One gave him when he finally took him down, and that it's not actually something that he had in life, because none of the flashbacks that we see of the second user of One For All actually have him having that scar on his face. We only see that in his ghost, effectively, in the Vestige world. And now that we've covered pretty much everything there is to know about the second user, what does that mean about what his quirk likely is? Now, I've seen a lot of theories, everything from time travel to spirit transferring, and I think those are interesting and fun to different extents, of course, but I think I'm going to be a little more grounded in this video and go with what I've been going with for a very long time, but here's why. When we see the flashback of the second user and the third user kicking open the door or the big vault to see what's behind the door, and he has his arm extended outwards, that's a hint to us that he has some sort of projectile quirk, right? That he has something that he can shoot out from his arms, or those weird gloves on his arms, forward, that he was using to kind of keep himself safe, like a person ready to fire on whoever's on the other side of the door. And the next hint that For All user number 2's quirk is Deku, when he's flying over the ocean, thinks to use the second user's quirk to go even faster to make his way to UA even quicker and get to Shigaraki and everyone on that battlefield. And we actually know that Deku already knows what the second user's quirk is. It's just us, the audience, and I guess everyone else who doesn't know what that quirk is. Because it seems like the second user and Deku have already had a conversation about Deku not using this quirk unless it's under a very, very specific circumstance, because the second user has given us a warning that apparently his quirk has evolved over time to only be used for a very specific purpose. Now, the second user of One For All lived in a time that was very, very hard on everybody. You pretty much had a war between vigilantes and All For One going on, and at that time there was heroes very much like Gran Torino that I think would think that death is sometimes a mercy for a villain that has gone too far. And because of all of that put together, I very much think that the second user's quirk is either going to be some sort of laser beam or some sort of similar to explosion like projectile quirk. But I'm heavily leaning towards a straight up laser beam. And here's why. One, Deku doesn't have any sort of long-range piercing moves. We know that this is one of the things that is missing from his kit. You'll probably say he can use Air Force or various things like that, but that's not really going to do piercing damage to someone like Shigaraki, whereas a laser beam or something like a Kamehameha wave actually would. It could potentially pierce right through Shigaraki, or at least burn his flesh, which we know is one of the few things that can stop his healing. And another reason that I think it's a laser beam on top of that is that we saw Star and Stripes use various laser beams with her jets and use that against Shigaraki to almost successful effect, but it would be a really, really cool way of scaling Deku even further by letting him use a laser beam that actually does work on Shigaraki. It'd be a really cheap but also effective way of putting Deku over Star and Stripes in a very, very, very small way, because you can't really have that the full way. Star and Stripes was incredibly broken, but as the main character of the series, you do have to gas Deku up a little bit, and I do think that would be an excellent way to do that. And on top of those reasons, a laser beam would have been effective at clearing a room if there would have been something dangerous on the other side of that door when the second user opened it, and it would have also been helpful to make Deku go faster as he flies over the ocean. But what is this one purpose that it's evolved for? And what is the danger that I warned about earlier to Deku? Because I did say there is a dark secret danger to Deku that I don't think even he is aware of. Now, the second user has let us know that this quirk is only to be used for one specific purpose, but I don't think he's let us know what that specific purpose is. And I think that specific purpose is to take Shigaraki out if the moment calls for it. If saving him doesn't work, this is the thing you have to do to finally take him down. And I think that's because the second user's quirk has been within One For All getting charged for so long that now it's way too strong to be used by a regular human being. It's kind of like the idea of quirks going in the singularity, or the idea that we had earlier that One For All could potentially do damage to Deku's body if his body isn't prepared for the effects that it could have on it. Well, I think very much like how Bakugo's explosion does damage to his arms if he makes too much of a big explosion, if Deku uses a laser beam here that his arms can't handle, and reminder, Deku's arms and hands aren't at 100% here, they are still injured and pretty much just being held together by the gauntlets that he has at this point, not being able to use 100% of his power without them. So considering the fact that Deku has to train all of his quirks, right? When they come out the first time, they tend to kind of come out wildly and uncontrollably. Think about Deku unleashing a 100% One For All laser beam out of one of his arms and what that would likely do to his arms. I'm suggesting here, people, that Deku might use this laser on Shigaraki, maybe if Shigaraki transforms and is too far gone and is starting to go the Akira route, and to take that large giant body out, I think Deku might lose an arm using a massive laser beam on Shigaraki. And that's when I think the second user's quirk is pretty much a giant Ultraman beam or a Kamehameha. So let me know what you guys think about my reasoning here. Let me know if you enjoyed hearing the story about the second.
Alright guys, I'm gonna stop here because I'm actually getting hyped up for Deku's final quirk. And if it is laser beam, it's a pretty risky, ability to use. Now, I don't want his arm to be cut off, but I do want Deku to be aware of that if he uses this quirk on Shigaraki and save him won't be the case, he'll have to use it. I mean, if he does, he would get a replacement arm depending if it can be healed from Recovery Girl, which it might because it takes a lot of energy to recover an arm. Okay? And even though he's practically human, he's half, hero, of course, but still. If that really happens, if he manifests that kind of ability, he might be more powerful than any of his classmates. And it'll take like a lot of training for him to use it because, he wouldn't probably just use it as a little play toy, but for some reason take out Shigaraki, it is a risky move. It is a risky, kind of quirk to use on him because even if he did try to save Shigaraki, he pretty much wouldn't be the same, but still, there's no way around it. Defeating him is the only option he has, but I don't know for sure, but I'm just guessing. Okay. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next information about My Hero Academia. And, yeah. Later, folks.